Hello viewers, welcome to Diagnostics, Dio here. Today we have a 2006 Ford E450 with a 6.0 liter. The complaint on this vehicle is the fuel gauge on the dash reads empty all the time. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go inside the vehicle and confirm the complaint. After confirming the complaint, we're gonna talk about what directions we're gonna go so we can fix whatever that's causing this fuel gauge to read empty all the time. So now let's go in the vehicle. So I'm gonna start the engine so we can confirm the complaint. So as you can hear, the engine is running and the fuel gauge is stuck at the empty mark. Actually, let me zoom you guys in so you can see. So right there, this indicator lamp over here is on, and our fuel gauge, let me get a flashlight. So right there, our fuel gauge is showing empty. Okay, so the gauge is stuck at the bottom. Now when you look over here on the right side of the dash, there is a message here that says low fuel. Okay, so we have confirmed the complaint. So now I'm gonna turn off the engine so we can talk about what directions we're gonna go so we can fix this problem. So I'm gonna turn off the engine. Now, in case you still have questions whether this fuel tank is full or not, I'm going to take you to the fuel cap. Actually, I looked into the fuel cap. I was able to see into the fuel filler tube. I can see fuel in the tube, so this tank is completely full. Let's go to the fuel cap so I can show you that this tank is full. So let's undo this cap. Now I don't know if you can see in there, it's really dark, but right there guys, so that's fuel right there. Okay, so the fuel tank is full. So now let's go back in the vehicle and talk about what we're gonna do so we can fix this problem. Our fuel gauge reads empty all the time. I'm gonna turn on the key once again. So right there, as you can see, our fuel gauge is still reading empty and we have fuel in the tank. Now this problem can be caused by three things. The first thing is a defective fuel level sensor inside the tank. If the fuel sending unit in the tank is defective, it's gonna cause the fuel gauge to read empty all the time. The other problem can be, the other possibility, I should say, can be a problem in the wiring between the fuel level sensor in the tank and the engine computer or the cluster, whatever the fuel sending unit in the tank reports to. Okay, I believe it reports to the cluster or the engine computer. So the last one can be the cluster itself. Okay, if we have a defective cluster or a defective gauge on the cluster, that can also cause the fuel gauge to read empty all the time. So either the sending unit in the tank or the wiring or the problem in the instrument panel. So the first thing we're gonna do is let's connect the scan tool first to see if we have a trouble codes. If we don't have a trouble codes, we're gonna use our bidirectional test in the scan tool to cause this fuel gauge to go up. If we can move this fuel gauge up and down with the scan tool, then our problem will most likely not be the instrument cluster. So I'm gonna get the scan tool connected and then I'll bring you guys back up. I got the scan tool connected. So now let's see what we got. So let's go to scanner. So let's do a code scan. Let's scan all the control units on the vehicle to see what we got. So we do have 3 trouble codes in the engine computer. Okay, so the first trouble code is P0460, fuel level sensor circuit fault. And the second one is P0463, fuel level sensor high input. And then the last one is P0683, glow plug control module to PCM communication circuit. So it looks like the glow plug control unit is not communicating with the PCM. Now we are here to fix the fuel gauge that's not working, so we're gonna attack these two trouble codes first. Okay, these first two trouble codes are the codes that are causing the fuel gauge to read empty all the time. Okay, now we're gonna scroll down and see what other trouble codes we have. We have the same codes in the transmission control unit and same code in the instrument panel. Okay, so basically these are the only codes we have. Now I'm gonna notify the owner about this trouble code over here, this third one, but for now we're just gonna focus on these two trouble codes. So let's go into the engine computer. Let's see if these codes are hard fault codes or just memory codes. So if they are hard fault codes, if I erase them, they will come back. Okay, right there we have our three trouble codes. I'm gonna back out and clear the codes. So the codes are cleared. Now I'm gonna cycle the key and let's see if our fuel gauge will now read the fuel level. So right there it's still stuck. I'm sorry, it's dark in here. Right there it's still stuck at the empty mark. Okay, so let me bring up our scan tool. I'm sure our trouble codes are still there right here. Let's see what we got. So right there, our fuel level sensor high input trouble code is still there, P0463. Okay, so that's good. Now the next thing I want to do is we have to determine if our problem is in the cluster or in the tank, okay, or maybe the wiring. So let's go to functional test. So we don't have it here. Okay, now let's go to the, because what I want to do is I want to do a gauge sweep to see if this gauge is working. So right here, actually I don't even have to do a gauge sweep because our code description is saying that there's a problem in the fuel level sensor circuit. Okay, but while we're already here, let's do it. Fuel gauge indicator control percentage. I mean, hey, we got the test available, so we might as well do it. But actually we don't have to do this because, so I'm gonna show you right there as I'm increasing the percentage over here. Look at that, you see how it went up? Okay, so let's go to half. So right now, okay, our gauge moved. Let's go to 50%. Our gauge should be reading like half tank right there. Okay, so the problem is not in the cluster. Okay, so we went to full. Right there, guys, the gauge is now reading full. Okay, so let's go back down to 0. As I'm doing this, it's changing. I don't know if I can, let me hold the camera here so I can show you. So I'm gonna be toggling the gauge with the scan tool. Just watch that. Watch the gauge go to 0. Let's go back up. You see the gauge moving up. Okay. All right, so we're good. Okay, the problem is not in the cluster. So now the next step is gonna be, so let's back out of here. Now let's go back to the engine computer. Let's see if we can look up this trouble code in the troubleshooter, and let's see what it says. Okay, P0463. let's look up P0463. P0463, and here it is. Okay, so it says P0463 fuel level sensor is circuit low input. Okay, description: the PCM receives the fill message through the controller area network CAN from the instrument cluster. The fill message is one of the several required inputs used by the PCM to enable the misfire detection monitor. Possible causes: fuel tank empty, fuel tank overfilled, faulty fuel control module circuitry, faulty fuel control module or instrument cluster, or faulty PCM. So just like I said, this problem can be caused by a defective fuel level sensor in the tank, or a problem in the wiring, or a defective cluster, or a PCM itself, or a problem in the PCM. Now, reading this is very important, because by reading this I have understood that the engine computer doesn't receive the message from the sensor. So basically the sensor reports to the instrument panel, and then the instrument panel sends the message to the PCM through the controller network, okay, through the CAN bus network. So now the next step is going to be going to the tank, doing the test at the fuel level sensor to see if our sensor is good inside the tank. So now I'm going to lift up the vehicle so we can do the test at the fuel tank. So here is our fuel tank, and our fuel level sensor electrical connector is somewhere over here. I don't know if I can show it to you. It's, if you look closely in there, you will see a wire. Oops, I don't know if you can see, but this electrical connector over here, I don't know if you can see. So this connector, it's a 2-wire connector. This is the connector for the fuel level sensor that goes on top of the fuel tank. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect it, and we're gonna see if our level gauge on the cluster is going to change. Okay, I mean the position of the fuel gauge on the cluster is going to change. Okay, so actually, since the vehicle is up, what I'm going to do is let's pull up the fuel gauge data pid on the scan tool here. So we are inside the instrument. Let's be in the instrument panel control unit. So let's go to data. Okay, so we got a bunch of data pids here. So I'm gonna customize this list. We're just gonna look at the fuel gauge. So right here, fuel level percentage, that's all we're gonna look at. Okay, so let's graph that. As you can see right now, it's at 10%. Okay, this is what it's showing on the cluster. Okay, so right here, 10%. So now I'm gonna disconnect this connector over here. So let's disconnect this. So I got that disconnected. So here's the connector. So we're disconnected there. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use a test light to bypass the sending unit inside the tank. Okay, so if you look closely in there, we have 2 wires on this connector. So I'm gonna use a test light and connect it across these 2 wires to see if our fuel gauge will now be reading full. If we, after bypassing the sending unit with the test light, if it reads full, that will tell me that the wiring is good, and our problem will be the fuel sending unit in the tank. Okay, so let me show you the wiring diagram in case you have a question about what I'm doing. All right, so we're gonna pull up our fuel sending unit electrical wiring diagram. Now we're gonna find our fuel level sensor over here. Okay, so here is the fuel gauge sensor in the tank. Okay, so it's a 2-wire sensor. There is the yellow wire, so yellow and white and black and yellow. Okay, so since we have a diesel vehicle, so ours is going to be kind of this one. Ignore this. This is what we're looking at. Okay, and as you follow these wires, they go to the instrument cluster. So what I'm going to do with the test light is I'm going to bypass this fuel level sensor. I'm going to use a test light across these 2 wires. Okay, after bypassing this fuel sensor with the test light, our code should go out. If the code doesn't come back and the gauge goes up and reads full, that will tell me that the wiring from the sensor all the way up to the instrument panel is good. Okay, at that point the problem will be the fuel level sensor. Okay, so now let's go back to the scan tool here. As you can see, we're still reading 10%, so which is basically empty. Our fuel gauge right now inside the vehicle is at empty. So I'm gonna get a test light and connect it across these 2 wires. This wire is not long enough, so it's really tight up here. Okay, so that's the connector right there. All right guys, so I was able to slide this wire down here, so now I can really show it to you. Okay, so these 2 wires are the wires for the fuel level sensor. Okay, as you can see, we have our black wire here with a yellow tracer, and this one is the yellow wire. It looks like this one doesn't have a trace. Okay, well, that wire looks a little bit discolored. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect a test light across these 2 wires. Okay, and it's actually these 2 pins over here. After connecting a test light across these 2 wires, if our fuel gauge reads full, that will tell me that the wiring from this point all the way up to the instrument cluster is good. Okay, at that point the problem will be our fuel sending unit inside the tank. Okay, I mean the fuel sensor inside the tank. Okay, I'm gonna get a test light and connect it across these 2 wires. After I do that, I'll bring you guys back up so we can check our fuel gauge in the vehicle. So I got my test light here and ready to go. So I'm back probing these 2 wires over here. Okay, so this side of the test light is connected to this back probe over here. Now I'm gonna connect this side of the test light to this wire. Now I'm gonna show you the PID on the scan tool first. As you can see, we're reading 10%. Okay, so now I'm going to connect this jumper wire, which is on the other side of the test light, to this, okay, to this back probe tool. So now let's look at the scan tool. Okay, so right there we basically went from 10% down to 0. Okay, and I'm sure right now the gauge inside the vehicle is reading full. So if we back out and go to the, you see all these codes we had. Let's go to the engine computer. Let's go to codes, memory codes. We still have these codes over here. So now I'm gonna erase these codes and let's see if there won't be any codes anymore. Remember that one fuel level sensor code was coming back. Now let's see if it's gonna come back. Let's go to memory codes. Right there, no fault codes present. Let's go to key on engine off on demand self test. Let's do that, because that's gonna test the fuel level sensor circuit also. So right there, no fault codes present. Okay, so what does this tell us, guys? What this tells us is that the wiring from the sensor all the way up to the instrument cluster is good. The problem is inside the tank. Okay, the fuel level sensor in the tank is defective. Now I'm gonna lower the vehicle so we can go inside the car and look at the fuel gauge on the cluster. I'm sure right now our fuel gauge is showing full. So let's lower the vehicle and see what we got inside the bus. Back here in the vehicle, okay, as you can see, our fuel gauge is now reading full. It's reading full because we are bypassing the fuel level sensor inside the tank with the test light. So we have duplicated the fault. Right now, if I disconnect that test light, our fuel gauge is gonna fall. It's gonna fall back to empty. Actually, let's go under the vehicle and disconnect the test light. You will see after I disconnect it, this gauge will fall down to empty. Let's go do that. Okay, so I'm gonna disconnect this over here. So now let's go back to our gauge in the vehicle. So right there, as you can see, the fuel gauge is now stuck at the empty position. I'm gonna cycle the key, so watch that. Okay, so our fuel gauge is now stuck at the empty mark. Okay, so this tells me that the wiring is good. The problem is our fuel sending unit inside the tank. So I'm gonna lift up the vehicle so I can show you what needs to be done so we can fix this problem. So we are back here under the vehicle, hopefully for the last time. So we are down doing our testing. The wiring is good, so I'm gonna disconnect these back probing tools that we have over here. Okay, so let's get this test light out of the way. Okay, so I'm gonna remove the test light. So at this point, the next step is gonna be dropping the fuel tank. So we're gonna empty the fuel tank first. We're gonna drain it, and then we're gonna undo these fuel tank straps. So this one has a 15mm bolt over here, and then we're gonna undo this one, and then this one. So we're gonna undo the middle one first. We're gonna put a jack, a transmission jack over here in the center of the fuel tank. We're gonna undo these bolts over here, and then we're gonna do the same thing on this side. We're gonna undo this one, or this nut over here. Okay, after we undo all of these, we're gonna disconnect this filler tube. Okay, we're gonna disconnect this hose to this filler neck over here. So we're gonna disconnect these two, and then since the electrical connector is already disconnected, the other thing will be disconnecting the supply lines. Okay, the fuel supply lines over here. Okay, we're gonna use a quick disconnect tool, or a fuel disconnect, or a fuel line disconnect tool to disconnect these two fuel lines. Okay, and then we're gonna drop the tank. I will do that off camera. After I drop the tank, I'm gonna bring you guys back up so I can show you the old fuel sending unit, and then I will reinstall it. When everything is reinstalled, I'll bring you guys back up so I can show you the results after the repair. Okay, so I will do that off camera, and then I'll bring you guys back up after I drop the tank. All right guys, so we got the fuel tank removed. as you can see, we have a huge empty space over here. So here is the new here's the tank, and the fuel tank is full. There's a lot of fuel in the tank. So here is the old sending unit. So this is the fuel level sensor over here. This is the old one, and that's the new one. So we're gonna do a ohm measurement here. We're gonna measure the resistance of this resistor here, and then we're gonna compare it to the new one. So we're gonna use this ohm meter. So Nathan, can you connect this? So we're gonna connect our multimeter to this resistor here. Okay. So as you can see right now, I mean, we are on the ohm scale. So at the empty position on the old sending unit, we are reading 15.4 ohms. So I'm gonna start lifting this float. It's like jumping all over the place. So the resistance increase is not consistent. It's jumping all over. So I'm gonna push this all the way. As you can see, when you go all the way up, it goes into an open. So now let's do the same test on the new unit. Okay, so kind of the same reading, okay, when the float is at the bottom. So I'm gonna start lifting it. Okay, so the reading on the new one is more consistent, and when I push it all the way, it doesn't go to an open reading. Okay, so at the end over here, we read about 120 ohms. Okay, so as you can see, the readings on this unit are more consistent than the reading on the old one. So this is bad. We're gonna install this new sending unit. Once we install this, we're gonna reinstall the fuel tank on the bus, and we should be good to go. So I'm gonna get this installed, and then I'll bring you guys back up when we install the tank. We have reinstalled the fuel tank. I got all the lines reconnected. The fuel level sensor electrical connector is reconnected also, so we're good to go. So now let's go inside the vehicle and verify our repair. Let's see if our fuel gauge on the dash will be indicating the correct fuel level that's inside the tank. So now let's go in the vehicle and verify our repair. So we're gonna focus on the fuel gauge over here. Remember, before it was reading empty all the time. Now we put all the fuel that we got out of the tank back in the tank. So the fuel tank is full right now. So now let's see what the gauge is gonna show. So I'm gonna turn the key on. Bingo. So right there, this is fixed, guys. This is a fix. Okay, our fuel gauge is showing full. Okay, it's close to full, and our fuel tank is full right now. I mean, there's a lot of fuel in the tank, so we're good to go. So now I'm gonna start the engine. Okay, so this is fixed, guys. This is fixed. I'm gonna turn off the engine. We're gonna turn the key back on. Okay, right there. Remember, before there was a message over here on this display that was saying low fuel, and that message is no longer there. Okay, so this is fixed. The problem in this vehicle was a defective fuel level sensor in the tank. Okay, the fuel level sensor was bad, which caused this fuel gauge to read empty all the time. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it right over here. This is fixed. I hope you like this video. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why, so we can make better videos in the future. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.